I actually introduced two other members of my team that I brought along. This here is Phil Whalen, and this is Ari Strom. Brought them along for a couple reasons. First of all, because we realized early on, based on the groundswell of requests for more mobile stuff, that there's no way we're going to be able to continue on our own paths developing stuff for people. So want to make sure I point that out right away. Forgive the title, a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. I realize that's not a very fast way to get 2.5 years taking to get to 60 forms, but you have to understand that the reality is we are a government agency with really complex hierarchy, and it's not simply top-down. I mean, we're responsible to the public, we're responsible to the commission, we're responsible to the governor's office and to other compliance agencies that oversee us. So how do we get here? It's kind of a backstory. First, the credit goes to Ari, who has been started it 2 years ago now with ODK, free open source software, and actually accomplished quite a bit with that. And I was really excited when I came on board to the agency about 1.5 years ago and found out that I was tasked with creating a mobile form. A single mobile form. And so I started with ODK, and quite frankly I probably would have ended up with ODK if not for my own people that I within our hatchery data section that I support actually shooting it down because it didn't do this or it didn't do that. So that kind of is the way I started my journey. Also with Phil's group that he recently left in our Region 6 office to come to headquarters, our ocean sampling program had attempted last year to deploy a custom iOS app that was an abysmal failure. They literally had to shut it down in the middle of the season because our users hated it so much. It kind of goes, it went down in flames, yes. And so in my case, my single, basically it was tasked with creating a single form, and it ended up turning into this agency-wide giant of a task because IT got on me right away. And on the one hand was insisting that I had to develop something that was an enterprise solution, and the other hand saying I couldn't talk to anybody else in the enterprise. So obviously we were butting heads from the very beginning. So forgive the subtitle, but this really does get at somebody. So as a data person at heart, I would absolutely cringe. And again, I had a field sciences background when I came to this agency. I'd worked in archaeology, in paleontology. I used to run mammoth digs actually out of the Yakima area. And so I knew that archaeology had its pain points around forms, okay, but coming from there to an agency as large as Fish and Wildlife with hundreds of projects going on at the same time and seeing just the sheer volume of paper forms and other peripheral devices, Excel spreadsheets, access databases stored locally on machines, I mean scary stuff, right? So we're a fairly large agency. We have some spend. And we're not necessarily huge, but we operate the largest hatchery system in the world. We produce the most fish in the world, and those fish actually contribute to fisheries and overlap with the fisheries that we co-manage with various states through international treaties, through treaty law and court decisions that precede us. So very compliance-heavy environment. And again, over 100 active projects running at any 1 year, many of them recurring. And basically the core pieces, they're either based around assessment, so getting baseline data for whatever they're studying, to doing active monitoring and sampling, and potentially doing restoration, so restoring, say, a habitat area or something like that. So a need for highly specialized data typically. So these are really individualized paper forms that people have developed out there. And then with all that, we have this increasing need for transparency with public records requests, Public Records Act, and public disclosure in general can be pretty touchy. So what sucks? So one example, this was a form I was actually supposed to build from the very beginning. So each one of these is a step. Data entry. So someone's out here, typically they'll say they're standing at a trap in a river, and they've got a grease board typically, and they're sitting there and they're writing numbers down, maybe, tick marks, tick, 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 tick. Someone else is sitting there and they're transferring that information to scraps of paper, and they're stuffing them in their pockets, in their waders and stuff like that. And then eventually somebody goes in and they fill out their hatchery-specific paper form. And then somebody at some point enters that data into Excel. And then maybe a couple weeks to a couple months to never later, it gets entered into this FishBooks, which is essentially just a corporate web application, which, by the way, doesn't actually collect all the data that these folks are collecting through this process, through a single form. So, kind of a problem. So, the other one, and around the same form, is their error rate was exceeded 35%. So you have people out in the hatcheries. We have over 100 hatcheries, right? Filling out these paper forms, then doing a little data entry in a web app, and then mailing that paper form into headquarters. But wait, if there's a mistake, they can't just fix it at headquarters because it's a signed legal document. They pack it up and they mail it back at $1 an envelope. And then they have to fix it on the web app, at the hatchery, and then they fix their data entry in the web app, and then they mail it back to headquarters, and then somebody sits down there and they approve it, and then they go to a separate web app and they enter the same information that was entered the first time. Not very efficient. And surprisingly, when they sit down and reconcile, which typically can take 2 to 3 months out of a year, they find errors. So, bit of a problem. So, overall concept. And again, my last job I worked in SaaS computing, so I'm a fan of the cloud, love efficiency, and totally a supporter of the idea of software as a service. The idea that, hey, somebody's already built it and it works, let's use that. Let's use a tool, let's not go build something ourselves from scratch. So, overall, a clicker counter, grease board, notebook, paper form, basically replace the manual process with something that works. Right, as a solution. And again, that solution, I wouldn't say is all iFormBuilder. There are also pieces, right? I think iFormBuilder is the core tool, but I think there are also other pieces we need. We also work with Esri. We also work with some other core applications, but this is the concept. The other big one, I mentioned Excel spreadsheets and access databases. So with over 100 projects, how many projects do you think, percentage-wise, anybody guess, how many do you think actually have their data going into a corporate system on, say, I don't know, a weekly basis? Any guesses?
5%.
Probably close, about 5%. And by the way, so as we sat down, we started looking at, as an agency, right? You start looking at the sheer volume of data flow, or flowing into systems, or the being collected out there. Very, very small percentage is actually getting into a corporate system. And so where they typically live are Excel spreadsheets stored on local machines and access databases that are copied and shared, with the data sources being on local machines. So overall, not very good. So the other thing we saw was, wow, wait a second, what if we could kill access in Excel? What if we could find something out there that it's somewhat advanced users, if someone could build a database in Excel or Access, they could use this tool to build something that would act similar to that Access app, because again, most of our people do also have a need for something mobile. They definitely benefit from it. And just as easy to use, but the benefit is once they sync that device, we have a copy of the data. So at least the data is preserved. So that was kind of our overall concept. And so far, our initial testing has worked pretty well. Phil here prepared a video because I think it's actually better to hear from the. What was that?
This morning, by the way.
So if I get volume here.
I think perhaps above that.
Was that?
How did you get in there? It should be. Ella, hey, how did you get the audio to play earlier?
Go ahead. Just use the Java. Use that. Oh, yeah.
Leave it?
A secret weapon? Wow.
But no. I thought you said weapon too. I'm like, geez.
So anyways, preface this. The idea here, Phil actually has done quite a bit of stuff with video, and I thought it would be kind of cool if we had some of our early adopters actually tell their story and talk about it. I apologize if the audio is bad, that's my fault, but Phil's done a great job of putting this together. So
Yeah, crank it up.
might want to come down a little bit, the airplane gets pretty loud. So again, this is Roy Clark. He's one of our samplers. He does pretty much his job is to fly in an airplane and pretty much most of the year and count people clamming or harvesting oysters or whatever.
Hi, my name is Roy Clark. I do aerial surveys of oyster harvesters in Puget Sound for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And basically, fly over beaches at low enough elevation to do a head count of clam diggers and oyster harvesters as close to low tide as possible. The information is used to estimate harvest numbers for public-owned tidelands along beaches, sound beaches, and being able to collect the data on a mobile device or on a device where the location and time stamp information is collected instantaneously without having to provide it is probably the biggest value of my bike.
Tight turns. Yeah.
This is his first day using the app too. Found it very easy to use.
So yeah, he's basically flying along beaches, dropping points on public tidelands, and then later we're post-processing that data in ArcGIS. So it'll transition here in a second. And we put pictures in the camera capability in there for him to take pictures of people violating. So we can take pictures and have them sent to enforcement. Downtown Seattle. Yes. I threw one overboard actually on the boat, and it worked fine, yeah. There's no way to know unless you test it.
Right, exactly.
So essentially what he's doing here is he's throwing a rake overboard that's attached to a rope, and he basically drags that rake for a predefined period of length, hauls that back up, and he's looking for herring eggs attached to vegetation. Again, pretty boring work, right? Except that he gets to do this like 3-4 days a week, all the way through spring and into summer. So.
Jake's on the iPad using the iPhone. Unfortunately, I forgot to.
So he just basically dictates to his person transcribing, and it's just tap, tap,
So it's
tap,
a
tap.
two-person operation?
Yep, it is. Always. It has to be for safety anyways. So the second person is the one doing the data entry. So.
Very light on posture of waffling.
Do you have any real-time like data needs? So like as I know you're doing this as two-man team and you're close to civilization. So I mean, are you pushing back real time, or are you?
We're just waiting until we get back, because we have to connect. This is actually a subform. So you have a parent trip form, and you go move along. So in our case, we launched, we come all the way across Elliott Bay, we start around the Seattle waterfront, we cover that, we go all the way back to Alki Beach, which is a few miles away. These guys actually were the ones that last year had the app that was a total abysmal failure. So what he's doing here is interviewing the charter boat captains that come in to, I believe it's Westport is where they're at, if I'm not mistaken. So a fairly complex, long interview. Phil's developed the forms for that. One of the cool things about it is that our samplers really love. By the way, this is this guy's first day using this form too.
First day
On the job.
program, yeah.
Never ever done anything, seen our sampling forms or anything else before.
What type of cases are you guys using?
They're life proof. That's just a life jacket.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say it looks like it's pretty bulky.
Yeah, it's got a life jacket on it because they have a tendency to drop stuff. And
Our fire departments use the same thing, but they're too long.
I was gonna say yeah, you're pretty durable.
What's awesome about WDFW is that, I mean, these represent 3 very specific individual projects out of over 100 different projects that are very specific and very different. And it's very interesting working with everybody, the breadth of data that they're collecting, how they're collecting it. And it's something that we do have very current projects, but the whole idea behind research is that kind of you're asking new questions every year, so you're designing new projects, and you need a rapid development for your applications, otherwise you just get backlogged. So having something like iForm where you're able to get a new project, come in and build application for it or form for it is highly desirable.
a list of active projects in development. So.
Is that all for your audio?
For the audio, yes, it is. Perhaps it will give it back to me. There you go. So again, primary WDFW devices. This is something we've struggled with a little bit. But iOS has become our go-to, at least from a fleet management perspective, simply because it's on all the right checklists for security and low support costs and everything else. And actually, we're really excited because we're the first agency in our state to actually get a private lease arrangement for kitted iPad devices. So we actually order them by kit through our vendor, set lease price them out for a 2-year lease, cycle them out. We put them all into MDM. So we're pretty stoked about that. We actually just got the award. In fact, I still need to go accept the contract, but I'll get that done in the next couple of days. Also with Android, we've played around a bit actually. The Panasonic ToughPad, actually we've done both the Android version and the Windows version running an emulator, and it's actually worked pretty well, just very costly. There is a lease option that we have through DES, which is our state Department of Enterprise Services. Again, very, very expensive, even at a lease rate.
If you don't mind, what's the minimum on a lease for iOS side of things?
$2,500 of iOS value, dollar value, is the minimum to enter a lease.
Wow.
So you get a price. We get a price break at $25,000 in the iOS area, but basically you're talking what, 5-6 devices at a time, and we have an order right now. As soon as the contract goes through, we have 20 that we'll be ordering immediately. But
and every 2 years you can swap it out.
Yep. Automatically, actually. So the lease company knows it's going to be coming back. CDWG is actually who we awarded the contract to. They actually help track it and coordinate with us, and they will know. They're just going to ask us, hey, do you want to renew on these? And then yes, and they'll actually get the new device shipped out before the old device actually has to be pulled out of service.
How would they deal with a broken device, or lost device?
Insurance. So we, as a state agency, insurance pool, we're insured 100%. We just basically take it out of this, pay for it, get the brand new device, and it just remains in the lease fleet on the same schedule. So we've also used Samsung Galaxy and HTC smartphones fairly reliably, pretty successfully. The problem with Android is you get some mixed match when as soon as you get really cheap, especially if you have anything really complex occurring on the device. So we're trying to, as an agency, try to be as standard as possible and make exceptions where we can. So I apologize for the quality, this is my sketching. But essentially, we had to come up with a back-end integration model because our IT department really wanted to see ultimately data landing and being stored in our internal systems of record. And we actually did have, especially if we were going to scale up, we have real needs to keep data being updated in iForm, needs to feed into our internal existing systems because we actually have databases that are shared by existing web apps. So this was pretty important. We've actually have a proof of concept around this. So for the Fortress here is actually our firewall. Pretty robust. You can't really pass things through it very well without proper permissions. But we are working on certificated requests. So basically setting up certificates with the iFormBuilder platform, being able to pass that through to a web service, and then essentially building a single master message queue that is going to basically, all its job is to take everything from that web service. The web service's job, take stuff in, throw it in a queue, one master queue, and we have handlers listeners handlers sit off to the side, and they put things where they need to go. And maybe no, I did not. This was actually, and to give him a credit, this was actually not my idea. This is actually our database administrator and lead developer that came up with this model. He also, the other piece that's not quite in here, but we've added now is that we're also adding a separate, we're basically throwing everything into MongoDB as a doing and actually have a proof of concept for is actually reporting live. So literally as that record is submitted, it submits to iFormBuilder, it hits our system, but it automatically, that record is either we're pushing it directly or maybe we're pushing it through Zapier to do the ETL piece and then pushing it to its endpoint. So we can actually do reporting again live, which we're pretty excited about. Some of the other things that have been developed shortly, Phil actually came up with the idea, and I think it's really cool, is there's other metadata we started to track. So for our ocean sampling crew, one of the things we've actually started is there are actually start and end timestamps on every single subform. So as they're interviewing people, we can actually tell you how long it takes to complete each interview on an individual level, by surveyor, by area, by whatever. So, which is pretty powerful, right? Because now you actually know how much it costs to sample that either the entire program, that launch or whatever. And you also get baseline data so that as you improve forms or improve process or whatever, you can actually quantify your gains in efficiency, which is pretty cool. So challenges, traditional IT. Huge problem for us because quite frankly, and not to poke at the military or anything, very respectful and supportive of anything else, but unfortunately our CIO is a retired lieutenant colonel who ran hospitals for his career. So very top heavy, I will bestow upon you solutions that you will use mentality, and unfortunately every solution they've tried to push on us has not worked. So it's rather unfortunate there. So we're slowly overcoming those things. We've seen a lot of change, and quite frankly, we've just been able to, every objection we've just had to meet with a counter argument, with documentation and information, and that's working. The other big key piece, I think, and this is just in general a pain point for infrastructure, is migrating from a purely Windows environment to Apple. And though many of them are now that they've actually have been informed, they have been educated, it's just that in terms of the why you would want to be able to do that, it's the how piece that's a bit of a pain point. So, I don't think I took up all my time. Any questions?